Okay, it being 6:30, I'll call to order the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It's Monday, March 11th, 2019, and we're at the Oregon High School Innovation Center. Could you call the roll, Ms. Heitz?
Ms. Feeney? Ms. Oderico? Ms. Flanagan? Mr. Pankratz? Mr. Kraus? Mr. LeBrun? Mr. Zach?
Present. Board has a quorum. I have noticed that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin Open Meetings Law, and copies of those notices will be with Ms. Heitz if anyone wants to inspect those. Our agenda this evening has our usual A, B, and C information reports, communications, and consent calendar. Under action items, we have a contract for a girls hockey cooperative, capital maintenance projects report, payment of bills through the end of March. And for information items, we're going to talk about staffing tonight, snow makeup day, the 1921 budget. We're going to see a video.
Yes.
Yeah, tonight. And then we'll be, at the end of the meeting, going into closed session and will not return to open session. So I'll need a motion to approve the agenda as posted. Mr. LeBrun, is there a second? Ms. Feeney, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We have an agenda. Consent calendar, any item that any board member wants removed, and I'll remove the minutes of the February 25th meeting for consideration. But other than that, does anyone else have anything else they want to remove?
You said you're removing the minutes?
I am. Okay. Then I would need a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
So moved.
Mr. Pankratz with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. LeBrun with the second. I will note that we have a couple of retirements. One is confidential. The other is Lou Kinchy, who we've seen at our board meetings for a number of times with the class where she goes around the world and reports to us about that, and has done wonderful things in the district. So we wish her well on her retirement. And then we have a number of donations, including Hagstrom Transportation donated $500 for a Oasis scholarship. Then a whole slew of administrators donating for the administrative scholarship, and we thank all of you guys for doing that. Quick Trip Headquarters has donated $150 for water and bananas for the Prairie View dinner and books, and Stoughton UPS store, $200 for that. And then the Madison Mallards have donated some time for their mascot to entertain at that Prairie View function. So we thank you guys for your donations. I think because we have a retirement that we're going to call the roll on the consent calendar, except for the minutes of the previous meeting.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Ms. Oderico? Ms. Flanagan? Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, the items on the consent calendar are approved with the exception of the minutes. You have at your place a copy of the minutes with some edits. My apologies, I was on vacation last week, and the last thing I was going to do was edit minutes while I was in Fort Myers. So I did that this afternoon and shot it to Katie. So those are at your desk. Under C, there's a question mark that Krista had about whether that would obviously come out. And then the other changes are reflected with overstrikes and underlines. And I thought of one more. I know Becken came in a little bit late. She came in at 6:50, I believe. And we should put that in, and that provided us with a brief student report. So then that happened right on discussion items, I believe. So if you would report that Becken came in at 6:15 and did a report. So I would move approval of the minutes with those changes. Is there a second? People need time to take a look. Yes. Yep. Barb. Could you turn your mic on, Barb?
Under fiscal impact, this would be page 3, the sentence that says the detachment, and don't we want that to say would have a?
Yep. I would accept that as a friendly amendment to the motion. If everybody's okay, at such point in time, it needs a second with the change that Barb mentioned. Everybody finished? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Got those, Katie? All right. Takes us to agenda item B, communication from the public. Board policy 180.04 is establish an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the board. Is there anybody who's registered, Katie? Is there anybody from the public who wishes to address the board this evening? Going once? Going twice? 3 times. Information items, OEA report. Anything, John? Okay. Student report. Hi, Becken. And we'll probably
Hello.
talk to you a little bit later about kind of your thoughts on the school makeup days sort of thing. So gonna alert you there.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anything to report tonight? Any big happenings?
The only thing that I could say is we had a couple big events this past week, and the mock trial competed, and they won 2 out of the 4 competitions, which is really exciting for our school. That was statewide. And then also we had an improv night on Friday, and we sold over 200 tickets, so we were able to donate $800 to the Gilda's Club in Madison. So that was a huge...
That's a great turnout for.
Yeah, I think it helps that sports are kind of in their transition at this point.
Yeah.
So spring sports are starting up, and winter sports had finished this past week. So yeah, and then there's a couple concerts that are coming up this week, choir and orchestra and band also. So
Is the improv group known as Silence of the Hams? Is
Yeah.
that the group? Okay. Are you in that?
I'm not. No, a couple of my friends are. But
Okay. Terrific.
Yeah.
We'll hear from you when we talk about makeup days.
Sounds good.
Great. That moves us to action items. D1 is 660301 agreement contract for girls hockey. And Brian, I believe that's yours.
We do not need action from the board on that. We typically have taken action at the March meeting, but Mike reminded me that last year we had a 2-year cooperative agreement, so we were all set with the other schools and with the WIAs, and I did not want to take it off the agenda because that creates more work and time on our end. So we're all set for girls hockey cooperative through the 2020 school year, so we will be back March of 2020.
Good.
I just have a
was-
quick question.
Yep.
Do you know how many Oregon girls participate in girls? 2.
All right. And it fluctuates, I would imagine, over the years? Very good. Thanks, Mike. All right. Thank you.
All right, 2019-2020 capital maintenance project, and Andy, is that yours?
It is.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. About this time of year, we always present the capital projects. It allows us, these are large capital projects throughout the school district that we try to complete during the summer for the most part. Not all of them, but the majority of them. They're fairly intrusive to the operation of the school, so we like to get a jump and obviously get some prices and those types of things now in preparation so we can get people lined up. So as soon as school's out, we can kind of hit the ground running with those projects. So with that said, I will give you a little PowerPoint with some photos of those projects, and we'll go through school by school. Just so you know, we did talk to, we solicited input from the buildings, kind of had them rank their first 3 projects. We tried to get those in here if possible. And then we also look at other things that are larger in nature, like roofs and boilers that might not quite make a principal's wish list. So here we're at Brooklyn Elementary. We're looking at the art room and replacing the sinks there. It's well used and needs to be changed. There's some problems with the faucets, those types of things. Obviously, we have a little bit of problem with the locker room partitions in the girls' bathroom there. You see that. And then what's very popular, this is obviously a fill station example. It's not where we're putting it. But basically, fill stations are kind of, anytime we're replacing any type of water cooler in the district, we are moving to fill stations since they are very popular. Students and adults enjoy taking the water bottles to them. I put a little square in the bottom there. We didn't get a photo of it, but there are a couple doors that lock, but with a little bit of aid with the concentration of all the security issues. We're looking to replace a couple sets of doors, which are kind of on the north side of that building. Netherwood Knoll, this one's a new one. You might walk by this when you come into the district office. See where that tiger paw print, or that panther paw print, not tiger paw, panther paw print is, sorry. We actually have a tunnel underneath that area. And because of the salt that we've been putting on that sidewalk for probably 30 years, the pan on the top of the tunnel, or the ceiling, is actually starting to give way. And there's a pipe that is the main water feed to that part of the building that's in that tunnel. So we are shoring that up right now so that it doesn't fall on that pipe and obviously create a problem. I'm told that there's no imminent threat of that, but if it continues, that could happen. So we are shoring that up in the next week or so. And then we'll need to replace the pan or the ceiling of the tunnel with concrete, and then probably pitch that whole area so that we don't have the salt go down and again corrode the pan or the ceiling of the tunnel again. So a little bit of an expensive project, one that we really didn't have on our radar until fairly recently. But basically all the rebar and everything is completely shot. The salt has done a thing to it. Here you have an example of what probably a 60s or 70s water cooler looks like. Again, we're moving toward these kind of our standard water cooler with a bottle fill on it, and that's in the north hallway of Netherwood. And then we're looking at replacing some doors, again, with a focus on security. If you see that curtained area, that's actually a big sheet of glass. Condition does exist in several places in Netherwood, and so we're going to be looking to drywall that up, possibly with some special type of material to make the wall very, very secure, and then putting a new door on it too. This is kind of like a pilot project for us to see if this works well, and then if it does, then we'll probably be in the years coming up kind of replacing these areas or these types of things in the future. Not a lot of money, but we're looking to replace 3 roof drains at Netherwood as well. This last freeze-thaw cycle has been a little rough on us, so we've got a couple areas that we need to deal with if we can. Here we are at Prairie View. You can see some floor buckling, those types of things. That's old VCT tile, probably original to the building or darn close. We've been replacing that as we've gone through. We replace it with stuff that doesn't require maintenance, which is nice as far as chemicals and stripping and all those types of things, which is kind of, again, kind of our main focus at this point in time, or our main way we deal with floors. Tin siding, just going to try to kind of beautify that a little bit, just a small amount of money to do that. And then obviously we have some sidewalk repair on the north side of the building with cracking and those types of things. We actually had our insurance carrier come out and identify this as a project that they would like us to deal with. And then we've kind of got a new focus based on what happened last year with our electrical switches. We are going to kind of start going through our electrical switches and make sure that we don't have what happened here at the high school where we had kind of a fault and things went a little bizarre for us for a little while. The electrical switch at Prairie View is our oldest that we have. I'm told all the other ones have been replaced. Since the buildings have been there. We did this high school this last summer. So we're going to just do some maintenance on it, just to kind of check it out. We hope not to have to spend that amount of money, but that would cover everything that we could think of that we would need to address. We do have a failing boiler at Rome Corners. This is the second boiler. We actually had 3 boilers there. We've replaced 2 of them with what you see, that white Diedrich. We will basically be replacing the second blue one there with another Diedrich. That would give us basically redundancy that we sometimes need in really cold temperatures. If one boiler would go out, we'd still be able to maintain temperature in the building. So we've been rolling the dice a little bit with that blue boiler as it had the same issues as the other 2. It's held up, but we think at this point it's probably time to fix that. Playground sidewalk, there's some drainage issues kind of on the west side of the Rome Corners, and so we're going to look at dealing with that. We also have a sinkhole back there that we've made safe for the period of time, but that typically means there's some type of drainage thing that's not working real well. Oregon Middle School, again, a little bit more sidewalks. This is on the back side of the building. We also have a drain that's creating some problems. This is the steel roof at the middle school, the flat roof, quasi-flat roof, I guess, at middle school that we put in a few years ago. Actually, it's been 10 years now. Is fine. It's just the steel roof that we have some issues with occasionally, and this will help address that. And then the blinds needed for library windows, we're going to put automatic blinds in there so that we can identify when we get into seasons like this, we can kind of close that down and make it still a usable space, and we don't have a lot of glare in the mornings, that type of thing. And then you see a box on the bottom there. Our DX units is just a way to cool areas. It's not the most efficient way. These DX units are original to the building, so we're coming on 30 years now. We're looking for maybe a more energy efficient way to cool that building. Hence a chiller type project. Chillers use typically a lot less energy than these DX units. So we want to do some professional services to kind of see what's possible in that regard, just to see if there's a way to do it. We think there is because the DX units are not too far away from each other. They're either on the roof or on the back end of the building, so we want to see what's possible. High school, the darn tennis court. We need to put a little bit of money into that to repair that, obviously. That was before the snow fell. So we can get that into a playable condition. Not sure. We do have to wait a little bit of time until it warms up a little bit before we can address that. But we will hopefully do that and try to get 3 or 4 more years out of that. Eventually, we're looking at a different type of surface for the tennis courts, and we're evaluating those. It might be $200,000 in order to deal with that, but we're told those types of solutions would make it a little bit less maintenance intensive. We did replace a couple fieldhouse roof drains last year. This would finish that project out. These are original to the fieldhouse and have in the past caused some problems for us. We have a new focus on that with the wood floor that's underneath that. We really don't want that to have any problems. It wasn't as big of a problem when it was rubber before the last renovation, but now it is a little bit more of a problem. And then we are looking to create a little bit more security kind of in the back hallway. This is where the old weight room would have been to the left here. And those maroon doors, you'd go into the old main gym. We're looking to remove on one side of the doors, which is on the right-hand side of this picture. And then we're actually trying to create another secure entry a little bit further down the hall. That will require us to move a set of doors that are in those hallways to the outside, just a little bit further to the north, so that we have our exiting requirements. So it's not an easy project, but we think we'll end up with a much better scenario, and we'll be able to secure the area outside of kind of the areas that are used for competitions. Then a big one here is the swimming pool roof. That is also coming on 30 years old and starting to have some problems based on our roofing consultant's evaluation of it. We are not going to do this summer. We will actually looking to bid this out next fall, and then we would shut the pool down for about 2 weeks next spring, probably in May, when we know that the temperature for a fully adhered roof will work. And we think we'll get the best prices by kind of attacking it that way. And then a little bit of drainage. This is actually not the right picture. I apologize for that. The north sidewalk is just around the corner from this. This is the old area. I'm not sure why they included that. I apologize. But just you're getting some ponding kind of by the new construction area that we need to address. It's not exactly at the new construction, but it's right next to it. And then this is something that we've been working on over time. We're looking to reconstruct the J.C. Park path that goes kind of through the park on the east, north, and south sides. If you've been through there, we've got a couple extensions that are in pretty good shape, and then you kind of go to the old path, and it's a little crumbly. It needs to be replaced. As well as the village has asked us, and this is kind of a new thing, they have asked us in the past when we developed J.C. Park East to put a path on the east side of Perry Parkway. We have been reluctant to do that for a couple reasons. One is we believe that it would kill those trees that you see there if we get too close to them, and really there is not real much of an opportunity not to be real close to them based on the size of the path that the village would like. As well as we're not encouraging people to necessarily set up shop on those paths for our events that we have there, and we think that putting the path there might create that situation where it becomes a little bit too inviting. So we actually had a conversation last week with the village, and they are entertaining, in the conjunction with their J.C. Park new master plan that just was approved, that we might be able to move the path onto the west side of Perry Parkway. And so we're going to work with them. We might do a little bit of an extension to the south of this picture that would kind of carry it through to our parking lot, and then try to tie it into where our path starts right now off of Perry Parkway. So that's there. And then we are currently holding a $10,000 contingency just in case something doesn't go well on all these projects. But typically we try to budget fairly conservatively in all these areas so that we have some flexibility if something does go awry. So with that said, does anybody have any questions?
The overall budget, Andy, is that pretty typical on an annual basis? That's
600,000?
That's pretty typical.
So we've used 600,000 as our target budget since 2010. We've been using some of that money for debt service payments. So that took it down to in the 400s range, because the rest of that money of that 600,000 was used for debt service payments. But all our debt service payments were finished this year. So now we have the full 600,000 at our beck and call, so to speak. In addition, obviously, so we have this next year, 99,200, and then with the referendum question, that 400,000 that we've had in there will continue forever. And then the district, when I got here almost 20 years ago now, we had about 100 and some thousand. We upped that to 200,000, so that's how you got to the 600,000. It might be something that we want to think about into the future as we have a seventh building. Increasing that budget down the road, if we have the flexibility to do that, might be a good idea, but not something we're proposing at this time.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, that was Andy's plan a long time ago, that we'd prefer not to defer maintenance on stuff and put those monies at risk when we have other needs. We've always had a really segregated fund to repair our buildings, and so that's part of the reason why our buildings are in such good shape, is through that process. And that's a large part thanks to the voters in the Oregon School District who have 3 times now allowed us to override the revenue limit to fund maintenance of our buildings. Also, we'd be in condition like we see some school districts who have let their repairs go for decades and now are facing a big bill for that. Any other questions for Andy? Courtney?
Andy, relative to the new path on North Perry Parkway, how is that decision going to be made? When is it going to be made? And what happens to that $62,000 if we don't build a path on the east side of North Perry Parkway?
Like I said, it's relatively new. We had finished the PowerPoint, and as we were having a discussion with the village just last week, Friday, I think my plan right now would be to just grab that little piece that would kind of connect where the village has stopped in front of the hockey rink to our path, would be this summer, along with the reconstruction area. And then I think we would hold. Based on what the village was saying, you know, the community needs to raise some money for the village to match. I think it's like $500,000 for them to do the first phase of J.C. Park. So I'm thinking that's probably a year or 2 out. J.C. West, right. So they're going to kind of try to figure out how the path would connect. They were very open to that. I didn't have a chance to revise this in that time. We could maybe reallocate those funds to something else. I don't think we're actually going to be spending it this year.
So is there a path in the master plan? And when you say path, you mean like meandering path, or are you talking about a sidewalk?
So, it's a straight path, but it's not a sidewalk. It's not concrete. They wanted like a 10-foot, 8 to 10-foot wide pavement path, basically along the west side of our property. And if you look at the master plan that we approved for this area with the village, it was included on there. Mm-hmm. They wanted it there. We've just gone back over and over again and said that's a problem for us, and so we've been kind of talking about it.
So if you look at if you go down South Perry or North Perry Parkway where they extended it across the creek, I mean, they've got that path on the east side of it running over there, then it's pretty wide.
Mm-hmm.
It would be pretty wide to put in on the east side.
It would go almost right to the back of those.
The fence?
Yeah.
There is a big safety area there. The street is so narrow. People are parked on both sides of that street, and they're trying to keep people in a consistent place, a paved path, as opposed to having them wander out onto the street between the cars. And so it's a safety issue more than anything.
Yeah. The other in their master plan, they take the parking lot that you see there and they actually triple the size of it. So again, they're trying to get cars off the street. I think their ideal hope would be to basically put no parking on the street.
Right. It's just too narrow.
Mm-hmm. They're reconstructing that portion of Perry Parkway this summer, aren't they?
I don't know that. They didn't mention that to me.
I thought they were.
Okay.
Because they did all of Perry Parkway except for that segment.
It was a little strange. Yeah.
It's in pretty bad shape. Mm-hmm. I mean, but one thing it does, it helps slow people down a little bit there.
Yep.
Okay.
And with the funding requirements for J.C. Park West, as Andy mentioned, it's going to take some time to raise that money, and it needs to be raised before the village is not matching dollar for dollar. They are waiting for $500,000 before they fund their $500,000 for the first phase of that project. And so I wouldn't expect a lot to happen on that street until that happens. There'll be a lot of heavy equipment there anyway, and they won't want it happening on a new street.
Sure.
I mean, right now it is tough because there isn't a sidewalk from the hockey arena down to the beginning of the old varsity baseball field, and that. I mean, if they would do a smaller path from our parking lot down to what's Shuey Field now, is that something we would entertain on the east end? There,
We could do a sidewalk next to curb type of thing. That really wasn't what they're envisioning, but we could propose that.
Yeah, I guess, Steve, that was my concern too, and Andy, I don't know if you've talked about it, but if we don't have a path on the east side, then there's not a connection from the hockey rink or South Perry to the high school without requiring kids to cross the street twice.
The other thing
We go on the path all the way around.
Yeah, we did talk about that. Actually, we did have one person who was walking, at least was planning to walk last fall, and we talked about opening the gates of the park so they didn't have to go all the way through, but they could cut through halfway. They're still going out of their way quite a ways, but it would have been a safe way to get from point A to point B.
I guess my preference would be to explore something that you could live with on the east side with the village to create that, because, for example, our rugby and lacrosse teams use that field, and that's a walkway down there. And I know just from driving down there, it's a real safety problem with people in the street, and it's going to be even more so now that Perry Parkway is open.
And it's a staging area for, if there's more than a couple of teams playing, one game going on, it's a staging area for other teams as they're queuing up for their games. So I think we're going to have a mess there if we don't have something more permanent. Anyway.
Andy, I was also going to suggest there are different, obviously, there are different options for paving, right? You could do some sort of semi-pervious things around the trees or something to protect the trees, potentially, to help. Might be a little more expensive, but.
And it's mainly just, it's kind of the middle tree that really cuts the glare for folks in the fall. So we don't have to do a huge area, but we're looking to get a recommendation from the arborist in town to what to do. Yeah.
I guess I'm hearing some sense of the board, Andy, to explore the east side with it. That's livable. Yep. I understand the 10-foot one is, then you're going to have people parking on it or setting up, yeah.
And that's actually somewhat the intent from the village's point of view, is they want everybody to be able to plow it. So.
Yeah, we can have narrower, plowed,
right.
Smaller.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Any other questions of Andy on the project report? Dan?
Yeah, just a comment on first the North Perry Parkway. We've got to get some way for people to walk through there. It's just we've got to do something to be a good citizen of the village. Everybody else puts sidewalks in front of their houses. We've got this whole new street now. It's a through street. There's no way to walk along this street without being on the street or being sometimes in the mud. It's just, there's no sidewalk. So let's get a sidewalk there somehow. I had a question about the RCI, the $20,000 for this playground / sidewalk. Maybe I didn't catch that. Was that going to be a drainage thing?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of things. To the right, I believe, I'm not sure. Yeah, Jason. To the left side, left side, there's a sinkhole. And then as you get out into the playground area, the wood chips, I guess the area holds water. And so we got to figure out a way to maybe put drain tile or something in there and get the water away from the playground, because otherwise, the wood chips are kind of like floating in water after the rain.
So it sounds like we don't really have a plan, but we've got $20,000 allocated to that?
We have a general plan, but a specific plan, no. You're right.
So do we know that $20,000 is going to cover that, or it's just more or less a placeholder?
I feel fairly comfortable that it will address the issues. Will it address? I think there's a continuum of things that you could do in this area. We could, for instance, like we did at Brooklyn when we did the new equipment out there, we put a concrete border around it. That's ideal. It's just very costly. I don't know that would be to the extent that we would go in this location, simply because this building's slated to become a different grade level in the not too distant future, and that will require different playground equipment. So I think we're looking to basically just get some drain tile in there. I'm not sure where that outfalls at this point in time, and then address whatever's creating the sinkhole out there. I think $20,000 is a decent allocation to be able to address those two things.
Thanks for putting this together. It's a good job. Thanks.
You bet.
Any other questions? Andy, it seems like we're pretty well set with roofs in the district right now. Do you have a plan or a schedule for those?
Yeah, we do have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, 10-year plan, sorry, that we had our roofing engineer. They just actually completed it. We're pretty good for a few years, but then we do have something kind of lurking out there in the range of like 1.5 million. We might take that and kind of spread it out a little bit like we always do. And those numbers can change. The further you get out, the more you might be able to get the roof to last a little bit longer. So we do have a plan. One of the things that, if I could just take one more minute of your time, one of the things that I'm thinking about doing is establishing what's called it's a sinking fund, essentially, for long-term capital projects. It's used fairly extensively in Wisconsin for districts that have kind of edged into that negative tertiary aid component, and allows districts to do large capital projects without impacting their aid, and allows them to kind of put a little bit of money aside. So that's a resolution that I might bring to you in the next couple months. The catch on it is you can't use any of the money that you put in it for like 10 years. But you don't have a requirement how much money to put into it. So you could open the account, put $1 in it this year, and at least you've got your timeline starting to run. So that might be something that we want to talk about. I'm not suggesting putting $1 into it, but maybe put some money into it just to start that clock running so that you can utilize those funds down the road.
Could you just give to Brian to shoot into our in-betweener the roofing report, just so that we have that to look at? That'd be great.
Sure.
Because I remember that, because I just threw my roofing report the first one you did.
Yep.
We had a really extensive one. I just threw that away because it was outdated.
And overall, our roofing consultant says that our roofs are in pretty good shape. It's just that they're getting to be at that age.
Yep.
Some of them.
Good. All right. We need a motion to approve the plan for capital maintenance presented by Andy tonight. Is there a motion to that effect? Ms. Flanagan, and with Dan with the second. Any further discussion?
Just thanks to Lanny.
Yep. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That takes us to item 3, payment of bills through the end of March, because we don't have our second meeting this month because it's spring break. We typically authorize administration to pay the bills through the end of March 2019, and I need a motion to that effect. Ms. Feeney with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Dan with a second. Any discussion? Could you call the roll, since it involves payment of bills?
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico? Yes. Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zock?
Yes, motion carries. Our creditors will be happy with us. Discussion items E, committee reports. I don't think either one have anything to report. Courtney, visioning?
I will be scheduling a vision committee meeting sometime in the next month, probably after spring break. I'll send out a doodle poll. I received a draft proposal from the Parent Advisory Council that came out of the Youth Task Force recommendations, and have some things to discuss with them, and they've offered to come, and also may start to talk a little bit about the process for some master planning for the piece of property that we purchased as part of the referendum. So
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
And Chris, nothing yet, right? Okay, good. Information items. 2019-2020 staffing. This will be in 2 components tonight. This is just for our consideration. We're not going to make any decisions tonight on staffing, but as part of our process, we've always asked to get some recommendations so that we have some time to sift and winnow and ask questions. So the first part of this will be a presentation. I think Troy's going to lead this. Troy, Tim, and I comprise the staffing task force, and we met, I think, three times, 4 times, 3 times, 4.
A bunch of times.
4. To talk about staffing. And Troy, take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andy. You can go ahead. So a little background. So if you recall, we set up this staffing task force sometime last year. The committee was made up of Brian, Leslie, Gina, Andy, Steve, Tim, and myself. And we, our objective was really to try and get a better understanding of what we have for staffing. So every year, as you know, come March and April, we revisit our staffing, look at what our additional needs are. And I think after we all went through that last year, we've had several new positions and some reorganization. So we felt like it would be a good idea for us to do a deep dive into what we have for staffing, and just give the board a little more foundational background as to what we have. As you know, everything that we do really revolves around staffing, providing our educators for our students. To kick it off here, this was Leslie's slide. She was really drawing the comparison between the DPI's equitable multi-level system of supports graphic and our 5 values graphic. So if you compare the two, you can click one more time, Andy. If you compare the two, you can see that they're very congruent. So everything really revolves around the whole child emphasis. So I think it's very enlightening to know that we are on the same page as the state DPI system. So to kick it off, we'll talk numbers here, and I have to admit I feel a little bit weird talking about everything with numbers when we talk about our staff, because our staff, our educators are so vitally important to our students and to society that I feel like just breaking it down into numbers is somewhat diminishing. So forgive us for that, but being that we do have to consider budgetary impacts of our staff, this gives us a good baseline of where our dollars are going. So currently we have 520 full-time equivalent staff members. So we have more staff than that, but the 520 is our full-time equivalents. So we have many staff members who work less than a full-time position, resulting in a higher number of overall individuals that work in the district. So we've broken this out into basically 6 different categories, and I'll step through each different category so that we can understand how these percentages come together. We'll go clockwise, starting with the academic core. So these are really our general classroom. Let me go back, Andy. The academic core is really our general classroom teachers in our core subjects. So reading, math, science, social studies. About 165 full-time equivalents, and that's about 32% of our overall staff. The next component is our universal or elective. So this would be general classroom teachers that teach anything other than those 4 core subjects. So in our younger grades, it's art, music, all of those additional classes. As we get into our older grades, it's more of the elective type classes where students are kind of choosing their path based on interest. The next major component there is academic support. So this is educators, teachers who are working essentially one-on-one with students who have additional needs, whether that be interventionists or advanced learning needs. And then we have the student support segment, which is about 94 teachers, mainly made up of special education. And then we have social and emotional learning, about 19 staff members, and 3.6%. And then lastly, we have our school support. And this group is our staff members who are not always working one-on-one with kids. They're generally, their positions are generally supporting the operations of our district. So go ahead, Andy. So I'm going to step through each one of those components and give you just a little more of a look into what makes up each segment. So that academic core instruction, we have obviously our classroom regular educators, and the number there is really driven by our district class size guidelines, where we have our K3, we're targeting 22 students per class as a maximum, and fourth grade through 12th grade we have a 25 class size guideline. And one of the things we talked a bit about within the task force is that we all know that class size is something that, right or wrong, it's a long-standing measure of schools. So when people are moving to a district, they often ask the question, well, what are your class sizes? And, like I said, right or wrong, that's a measure that the public looks at. We've discussed that, and we know that really doesn't tell the whole story. There's also a big component of what type of support and what type of additional academic support does the school provide. And we think here in Oregon that we have a very robust support system in academics, as well as our class size guidelines. So but that being said, 23 kids in a kindergarten class is a lot of kids in a kindergarten class. So those are some of the discussions we had around the academic core. Some of the other components that make up this segment of our staff, we've included the library and media specialists, and also our literacy and math coordinators. So these are newer positions at the K-8 level. Positions where we have leads that are coordinating the math and literacy curriculum. And then lastly, in this segment, we have our coaches. So we have basically three different types of coaches: the instructional coaches, the literacy coaches, and our math coaches. Next slide, please. So coaches, what do they do? So coaches are really focused on our teachers. So helping our teachers achieve the standard-based goals, helping teachers understand the standards and teach to the standards, and also looking at the impact of how effective our teachers are and working to improve our teachers' practices. Next slide. So the next segment is our universal and elective course instruction. So this is just a breakdown of the different course offerings that we have at the various grade levels. So starting at K-8, we have world language, art, general music, Phi Ed, orchestra, and then recently we've added mindfulness PE at the K-4 level. At our 5-8 level, we have all of those previously mentioned sectors, as well as adding in technology, health, STEAM, chorus, and careers. And then at our 9-12 level, we have a pretty robust course offering with those major course breakdowns there. And our next slide goes into a little more detail on the staffing associated with those course tracks. So we have a wide-ranging course offering at the high school level, and we talked a bit about how do we determine which courses are offered, and as we understand it, it's all really based on request. So there's a certain level of student requests that it needs to meet a certain threshold before a class will be offered. And I want to say that that threshold was around 12 to 20 students per class, kind of depending on a variety of different factors. But we are not typically holding classes that have a very small number of students in them. We do need to meet a certain threshold. Next slide. Our next sector, academic support. So this again is educators who are helping our students who need some special support, whether it be intervention or advanced learning. Our alternative education OASIS also falls into this category, as well as our bilingual and ESL staff. And then just as an example, wanted to show you what an interventionist schedule would look like. This is just an example of a typical elementary school. I believe this is a reading interventionist's schedule. So breaking it out by period, 8 to 3 o'clock each day of the week. Their schedules are completely loaded up with small group instruction. So they're pulling out small groups of students from their regular classrooms and giving them additional support with reading, and then this also occurs with our math interventionists as well. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give you a little deeper dive into the interventionists. Next category is our student support. So this is about 94 FTEs. And the largest component of this staff is our special education teachers and our special education paras, really making up the majority of those educators. Next component is our social and emotional learning. This is made up of our counselors, our school psych, our SEL coaches, and social workers. Breakdown is shown there on the slide. And really the takeaway here is that our ratio, and we've heard this before, but our ratio of counselors to student is really on the high side of some of our peer districts. So it's something that, I think we're aware of, something that the administration is watching and certainly thinking about. And I think that goes to a lot of what we've talked about is trying to push some of that social and emotional learning down into the regular classroom educational setting as well. And then lastly, we have our school support segment, 130 staff members or 130 FTEs, about 25% of our staff numbers. And again, this is all of kind of our operational type of staff, our principals, our administrators, our custodians, our food service staff, a lot of our paraprofessionals, and IT technology. And then just circling back here to the overall graphic, kind of showing that breakdown, just summarizing summarizing where our staff is. So that kind of gives you an overview. We went through much more detail in our task force meetings. Conversations really went far beyond just staffing, but that kind of gives you a starting point for moving forward. So.
Great. Tim, anything to add? Because you were on the
I just want to thank Troy for putting that summary together, because it was 3 or 4 meetings that Leslie took us through one group at a time to help us understand why we have certain talents in each of those groups. It is an it really came to light for me, the extraordinary choreography that takes place behind the scenes, because it isn't just about, do we have the right number of teachers? It's about what all goes on in that classroom and what all goes on to support our students that requires the perfect balance, and it's always being tweaked. I remember I used to tell many people who ask me how many teachers we have, and I always said about 300. Well, it isn't 300 teachers. It isn't. It's 500 and some people, made up of about a third of our core educators, and then the rest support those educators and support the rest of the system. And it allows us to not spread ourselves thin, but it allows us to evolve very thoughtfully without just simply talking about how many teachers do we have in the classroom, how many educators do we have in the classroom, how many custodians do we have at RCI, whatever the case may be. It is the choreography, the way Leslie explained it to us, and she did it very thoughtfully, really helped me understand how we employ 500 plus full-time equivalents in this district. And it isn't just about hiring more educators, it's about the balance that takes place around educators and support staff in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So I really appreciate you putting together that summary, Troy, because it fits into 9 slides or whatever the case may be, but again, I keep saying choreography because that's what it is. It isn't just about supporting a teacher, it's about how everybody works together to get the job done. So thank you for explaining it the way you did.
Anybody have any questions of us and Troy on the task force? Before we launch into the rest, Dan?
Yeah, I got, it's a lot of stuff, and it helped get an overview. There was just one particular thing that kind of jumped out at me, and I'm not sure why that was. And I don't know whether you talked about this, but it looks like we've got just in the SEL area, the social workers, we have a half-time equivalent at the high school and a half-time for the 2 grades of 7 and 8, and it just seemed like it was a little like the high school maybe could use more than with 4 grades than the 7 and 8 has with 2. And I don't know how that's coordinated. Maybe they just are assigned there and they do other work at the high school. That's the only thing that I noticed that stood out to me. But as an overall view, that was helpful. I learned a lot.
So, okay. So in terms of the social worker, Dan, on paper it's 0.5 because we have one person who does 7/12, but she allocates her time based on the need. But I'm sure if you asked any of us, would we love to have additional social workers? Absolutely. And it's something that we talk about a lot in terms of our staffing, and you'll hear that from me too in terms of our mental health needs.
One of the things we talked about in that regard was, our counselor system. They're working with a lot of things, but they're getting a lot of their time now dedicated toward dealing with the social emotional needs, but they also have this huge component of scheduling and working with kids and credits and that sort of stuff that they're getting stretched both ways. So we talked about the needs in that area, particularly at the high school. Any other questions? Yeah, Troy, this was an excellent job of synthesizing what we talked about. I went into it wanting to, I had a really pretty good understanding of where we are at in terms of classroom teachers and that. That was pretty easy, but over the years, adding the interventionalists and where they fit in and where they're at, and then the coaches at this point in time on the other end, I didn't have a real good overview of that, and these numbers reflect kind of how that all plays, and I have a better idea of where that is. I have a greater comfort level with where we're at. Not only that we're meeting needs, but we're doing it efficiently, and we could always add more, but I think what we're doing is really efficient. And your point was really well taken, Troy, that so many times you look at just the ratio of classroom teacher to student as opposed to, all the other auxiliary needs. And we are doing well, but we can, there's more needs out there, obviously. Dan.
One other thing that leads into something I forgot to mention. Have you come up with some other way to describe the teacher to student ratio instead of kids per class, instructor to student ratio per school, anything like that? Did you discuss that as part of your job on the committee?
We certainly discussed it. We don't know of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian or Gina or Leslie, but we don't know of a universal way to compare the various, because every school seems to do things a little differently, and
That is the ultimate holy grail. And if we could find it, no kidding intended, we would not have a budget challenge anymore, because we could sell that concept. The sort of one of the oldest metrics has been class size in terms of ratio. I'll say a new metric for us are some of the positions that you saw in terms of coaches. And the question that we often get asked is, are those classroom teachers, how do they help students in the classroom? I'd love to have a metric on, the value of coaches and the universal teaching that they provide to teachers, which then gets translated to the classroom teacher. Good question.
Well, I could just suggest trying to work up a student-to-teacher ratio or an educator-to-student ratio, because there are a lot of times when you might have 25 kids in a 6th grade class, let's say, but there's one full-time teacher there. There may be another full-time person who is assisting one particular student in the same classroom at the same time, and you may even have a paraprofessional in there. So you don't have 25 kids with one person leading the education. You've got education going on with 3 people focused on these 25 in different ways. So that's one per, I don't know, what's the math there? 9, 8? One teacher for every 8 kids in that class. And I think whether it's a standard that everybody uses or not, it's something that we can trumpet at our school. And if people like the way it looks on our website or in our the way that we tell them about it, other schools maybe can jump on board so that they can also show that they have more than just one teacher per class. And you can't just say it's a 23 kids per classroom or 22 or 25. You say, this is how many educators we have in this school. These are how many students we have in this school. You divide it, and you say, your kid is going to get an average of this much attention, which is more accurate, really, than class size, especially as we move towards individualized learning.
DPI keeps stats on FTI, or FTEs per student, right? So it's a broad, you can look at it that way, too. All right. Any other questions? Barb?
I'm just wondering if you talked at all about, as we get further into personalized learning, how that's going to affect the way that we talk about that ratio or affect the ratio itself.
Go ahead.
I don't know. That might be a question for Leslie. Do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure how much it would be impacted, because even as we begin to go more deeply into personalizing the experiences for each child, that teacher and student relationship is still the foundation of the learning that happens in the classroom. So we've always been holding very firm to the idea that personalization isn't just more kids on computers doing individual things. It's still about making connections with people. And consequently, I don't know if our ratio will change significantly, even if how we accomplish our task changes, because at the core of it, it's still about people relating to one another.
Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, Troy, for putting that together. Thanks, Leslie and Gina and Brian and Andy, for walking the task force through our numbers and giving us a better idea of our staffing. And that leads us into the preliminary review of our staffing plan. So Brian, are you going to start?
Sure, just a couple of quick things. We realize we've given you a big report with lots of pages and lots of information. Sort of three main purposes tonight. First, Andy's going to walk through some budget analysis to give you a sense of where we believe we are in terms of available funds. And then Gina's going to walk through the details of the various tables we've put together for your consideration. And I can make a couple of wrap-up comments, but I would say the most important thing that would be valuable to us as administrators is if you have feedback for us, ask those questions tonight or share those questions between now and our next board meeting. I will say we are a little earlier in terms of presenting information to you, so it's catching us a little earlier in the cycle, and obviously without a state budget that is set, it also creates a bit of a dilemma. And later on during superintendent's report, I will share some information from a legislative session that I attended recently as well. So this is a off-budget year where we're preparing a state budget. So some of our funding sources are not as firm as they normally would be. With that, I will turn it to Andy, and he can walk through our best estimate in terms of where we are today.
Okay, I'm going to start actually on page 3, kind of the bottom of page 3, if you want to page to that area. It's section I, budget summary, and it's very appropriately titled the big picture budget estimate. Sorry, my mouth failed me there. This is obviously, as Dr. Bussler just said, we are very early in the budget game, so this is our best guess at this point in time. We've usually been pretty good at guessing this. Some of the numbers should seem very similar to what we did when we brought the 5-year budget projection to you, but it did actually improve slightly. We were around the $150,000 range. We've actually kind of, as the budget's gone through, we've looked at some things, made sure, we've got everything appropriately budgeted, and we're closer to $223,000 available, and I'll walk through that real quickly. The first thing we do is we said, okay, if we just grew with student population and didn't have any increase in funding or anything, we kind of kept the same rules that are in place right now, what would happen from a revenue standpoint? And since we've been growing over the last several years, and then we actually, in addition to that growth, we projected the 99 students that we talked about last time, that we projected that to have an impact of about $800,000 just standalone for us. So before the state would add additional funds or allow us to use the revenue cap or anything, increase the revenue cap allocation, we think that would bring in about $800,000. Then we talked about, okay, what if the governor's actually projected right now or proposing right now a $200 per student increase in the revenue limitation. We said, we've got divided government here. Let's use $150 just to be safe, trying to be a little conservative about that. Some districts are actually only budgeting $100. It really depends on where they feel the comfort level is. So that would provide another little close to over $500,000 or $578,000 in revenue for us to allocate toward expenses for next year, additional expenses. Open enrollment, we're not using that as much as we have in the past, but we do anticipate some impact in open enrollment, so we're thinking about $80,000 impact for a total of just under $1.5 million as far as an impact in revenue. Then we look at kind of what do we need to take off, what's out there. So we have an educator compensation plan, and this is the movement to the teacher schedule. So every 5 years they move. There's basically 3 steps and then 2 rows if you have your master's or not. So we're budgeting a fairly significant impact where we know where people are right now, and if they just move to that step where they get an increase, that's about a $359 impact with benefits. Okay, so that's salary and benefits. And then if we take the 2.44% that we know is the CPI, the WERC has certified that, and we allocated that to all of our staff, that would be an impact of about $650,000. And then the next thing we have out there, which is also the first thing to some degree, is we anticipate, in fact, we met today with Unity Courts, our insurance carrier, and they did confirm at this point in time, actually confirmed a 3.95, but pretty darn close to a 4% impact, so about $250,000 impact. So if we add those things up, we get about 1.235 million. Subtract that from the 458, now you get the 223,000 impact or available funds for additional staffing for next year. Again, this is preliminary, and we'll continue to look at the tea leaves as they go.
Andy, where did the additional money come from the 5-year plan? I couldn't find it. We're up about 60 grand from that.
I thought it was about $150,000 impact, or what we thought would be available at that.
Yeah, we had like 1.395.
Oh,
and then our
in revenue.
Yeah, in the revenue.
I think most of that was probably catching the open enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else with questions of Andy on the fiscal end of that? Okay, phase 2 then, right?
Yes, we're off to Gina.
All right, so we talked about this as an administrative team and really broke it down into the 3 tables that you'll see. So the first thing we look at as a team is what are things that we're legally required to have. So it's really not an optional position. And then also, given the board's historical guidance on class size, then we really look at that next. So taking the estimated number that we had available, we tried to look at, all right, what are things that are the highest priority in terms of what we need? And you'll see that in table 1. And this is just preliminary discussions. We will also be discussing this tomorrow based on the board's feedback tonight. So what we talked about is looking at potentially adding a 5th or 6th grade teacher to RCI. Just moving forward, the students we have now, we are at the class size guidelines. So we're really putting that on a watch list. But if we have new residents, move-ins to our district, we're already a little bit over our guidelines at RCI. So wanted to keep a watch on that. Also looking at the middle school sections don't break down as well as they do really K4 or even 5-6. If you look at the schedules, and Leslie and I went over this a few times with Shannon to make sure we understood it, but we have class sizes in science and social studies that are 30 plus. And that is not where historically the board has wanted us to be with those class sizes. So we would look at adding a science or social studies teacher at the middle school. Additionally, talking about our students' needs that are either homebound or need neutral site services, that has really increased, I would say last year and this year. And so we talked about, do we have a instructor that we employ to be able to meet the needs of those students in an alternate environment? We have wonderful staff that have helped us over the years that have retired and have come back to help us, but they, want to live a happy life in retirement too. And so, we've thought about, is that something we just dedicate a position to? And those are services that we're required to provide with a student's IEP. We are also looking at caseload, and our students that have hearing needs has increased as well. And so we're looking at adding a 0.3 position for a deaf and hard of hearing educator. We are hoping to be able to fund that position through grant funds that we receive from the federal government. So in terms of our highest priority, those would be those 4 positions. So then we talked as a team, looking at table 2 is assuming we had additional funds available or we did a good job in hiring on those positions and had money available, then really what do we see as the next level of priority? And you'll see those positions in table 2. They are not in a priority order. We need to have more discussion in order to prioritize those as well. But in looking at, and you'll see the list, some themes that we have. First is our English language learners. Right now we concentrate those learners at Brooklyn and at Prairie View. We have one teacher that goes to both schools. So we do lose some time in travel that we could be spending with students. So looking at adding a position at Prairie View to meet those learners' needs. You will see table 2 is very heavy on mental health. And we've had a lot of discussions with the board about just students increasing needs in that area. So right now, particularly at middle school and RCI, we have a full-time counselor at each school, and then we have a .9 who goes between schools. For this semester, we've tried having 2 full-time counselors at each school, and everybody would agree that that's helping. So we would love to make that a more permanent arrangement. Additionally, our school psychs, excuse me, we have part-time positions at many of our schools, and we have people in those positions that have expressed an interest in becoming full-time, which would be wonderful from our perspective because we know that the students have increased needs, as well as retaining them. That is a very hard to fill position, and so we don't want to lose those to full-time positions in other districts when we certainly have the need here. So looking at increasing those FTEs at our various schools. And we've talked a lot, Troy mentioned about our counselor to student ratio, as well as I think Steve mentioned that. We continue to look at that as well. And I know, Jim has been monitoring that at the high school level as well, and would like to add a counselor if we were able at 9-12. Also, then looking at just some of our other instruction areas as we grow, that just puts more pressure on our other courses like band, orchestra, choir, German. We have a lot of interest in those courses, kids that want to take them, and we are seeing high section numbers in all of those areas as well. In terms of district level positions, you will see on here a .5 safety and security coordinator. We just have an increased emphasis, both legally and from a community on school safety. And so we're going to be adding an additional school. We have spent a lot of time on school safety. Andy has been the one heading that up. We have a grant that we need to administer, and we feel like we would just be doing a better job if we had someone to focus and coordinate expertise in that area. And then from an overall picture, looking at adding an assistant director of instruction to really manage our curriculum needs, which is really the core of our mission. And we're also looking internally if that position could be funded through a reallocation. So that was our next level of priority. And then we really move into table 3, which is also not in priority order. But this is just, in an ideal world, if we could just increase our student supports in these areas, such as math and reading intervention. You will see that on here. Alternative education needs, a STEAM coordinator. That has been a very hot area in our district. And so just somebody to ensure the continuity from a K-12 standpoint. Library media, as the instructional technology standards change, we can use additional support in that area. And then looking at what we've talked a lot about, just the needs of our students in terms of behavior. So looking at how can we best address those needs, and perhaps that's through a program support coordinator, an additional person to assist, as well as additional associate principals to help with behavior, and our requirements under educator effectiveness, which is our teacher evaluation tool. So I know I went through a lot of material very quickly. So what questions do you have for me on table 1, 2, or 3?
I'll start over here. Dan, anything?
Just to clarify, table 1 are things that we believe that they're high priority. If it's needed, like the first one, we don't know if that's going to be needed, but it's going to be something that we feel we need to do, right? The administration feels we need to do.
Correct. We will watch the enrollment very closely with our registrar.
And then table 2 is not in any particular order. Second tier needs.
Correct.
And table 3 are third tier wish list. Okay, that's all.
Troy? Courtney?
Just a general question, which is just as an estimate, the 223,000 that we think roughly that we have, does that just cover table 1 under this current scenario? Does it go into table 2? In which case we will at some point need to prioritize at least table 2?
We're hoping it'll go into table 2.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What we're going to need is numbers before the next meeting, and probably well in advance of that, so that we can kind of, puzzle piece this together.
Okay. I can certainly do that.
No, that was it.
Okay, Krista?
That was my question too, Courtney. I also see the leading educator positions. It would be nice to know what those were, and I think those were one-year appointments, so what the plan is for those for second year, and if there's flexibility there. That would be good to know for staffing. And then as we look at Table 2, which there's not mental health positions related to mental health in Table 1, with Table 2, has there been any pursuit of grants or public-private partnerships? So that would not necessarily be all the funding that comes from public money. Have we pursued any of those opportunities?
We have. We do the Building Bridges program with the county, where we fund one position and they fund the other position. And we plan to continue that arrangement as well. And then I would look to Leslie or Candace as chairs of the mental health task force, if you want to speak to the grant.
Yes, we have one that will be, the deadline is in May, so we'll be applying for that.
Okay.
We did not receive it last year, but we'll be applying.
Okay.
And just a reminder for everyone, perhaps we don't really count this in our staffing, but it really does provide mental health staffing support for our kids with Lake City Counseling and Oregon Mental Health, because either they come into our school or some of our kids are able to go and visit with those mental health providers. So we do get a measure of additional mental health support that it sort of feels like they're our staff, but they're really not our staff. They are providing services to our kids. And that plan, we have continued to partner with them and plan to for years into the future. Leslie or Candace, anything to add to that?
Tim?
I have a couple more.
Oh, sorry.
The other thing is you talked about in your staffing study, and we talked about here, is where we rank in terms of other Dane County schools in terms of ratios with mental health positions or or counselors. It would be nice to have that information to see where we're at with those ratios. And then the last thing was you talked about, and we've talked about the class sizes, that has come from the board in terms of the 25 to 22. Is that a standard that we're using from DPI, or is that something that the board decided 10 years ago? Where does that come from, or where are we getting that, and is that something that needs to be reviewed?
I can give you a quick answer to that. The standard is something we brought from our collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
And while I'll say it wasn't a standard fast and firm, it was a recommendation. And when we went through Act 10, we thought that was an important part to bring forward. So we've been living with it as though it's the ongoing standard. But we'd be happy to have a conversation with board members about it again, because it has been in place for
As long as I've
many,
been on the board.
likely 30 plus years.
Well, because I think it tends to be our starting and stopping point when every time we talk about staffing. And is that a relevant number? Is that a relevant thing to start with, knowing we have budget constraints? But should we start with values, or start with what we know in terms of what's happening with social, emotional, and mental health? So I just think if it's not something we've looked at in 10 years, we should probably look at that. And then in terms of class sizes, I was looking through some of the numbers for the high school. And so you look at like an AP Psych that has 40 kids per class, and then you look at some other. So I don't know if there's a standard. It's just a general question. If there's a standard based on the type of course it is, or the type of teacher, or and now I know we have a large senior class that's graduating. So do we have any flexibility with, or any recommendations that are coming from Jim in terms of staffing at the high school, or looking at being more flexible with class sizes there? So that's just a general question.
Tim?
You mentioned the work that we do. Candace mentioned the work with Building Bridges, and it's a we fund, they fund project right now. Is that population based? I mean, if we get to a certain size, we fund to, they fund to, or is it just a per school cooperative effort?
It's just an overall cooperative effort. We receive 2 social workers, and the county pays for 1, and we match.
Okay. All right. You also mentioned the cooperative work that we do with Lakeside Counseling. Brian mentioned the Lakeside Counseling and one other group. I can't remember.
Oregon Mental Health.
Yes, thank you. Is that out of our budget, or is that third-party insurance covered?
That's Whoops, now I'm on. That's third-party insurance covered.
And
It just feels like they're part of our staff because they're helping our kids and providing services.
And is that a growing, are we finding that that's a growing benefit that employers are offering, that third-party insurance, where we can access more of that without it coming from our budget, or cooperate with more of that without using our budget?
I'll ask Candace to help out too. Typically, the mental health treatment that's happening in counseling is more direct therapy as opposed to, crisis intervention, where do we use student services or pupil services? I should know after all these years. Student services. Our student services staff are more intervention related and typically do not do the ongoing therapy that a private practice would provide. Now we'll get the correct answer.
Well, I think we were one of the earlier schools that were doing it, and I think more districts are trying to provide more services on site. For our students, it increases the number of kids that we see, and we initially started it for those who couldn't, for whatever reason, be able to get to a counseling appointment. Now it's a little broader than that, so it is more than just those who can't access it at night, just to make sure that kids are getting what they need. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. Certainly, it is more prevalent. I think we went from our first year of having like 11 students being seen to over 100.
It's just evolving as more accessible support. I guess that's what I was getting at. It's becoming more common. That's the point I was getting at, so thank you.
And Tim, the other item, when we had some funds in our mental health grant that allowed for it, we were providing the first 7 sessions for some students that didn't have access to insurance. I'm not sure if we're still doing that in 1920.
We had a period of time where we went down to 0. We now, on occasion, get a request for that. Okay. Small number of students.
So the point is there has been some limited district budget support for families or students that didn't have insurance support, so they could get up to 7, I'll say, visits with the mental health providers. And we had taken that out of our mental health grant when in fact we had the mental health grant.
It was our hope then that that would give us time to get people connected with an insurance agency and take over the funding.
In the proposed state budget, is there money earmarked for mental health? Right. I mean, is Evers proposing some additional mental health directed funding?
Yes. And the other item that we didn't talk about, because we don't want to paint too optimistic of a picture, but there is a fair amount of, I'll say, support for increasing special education funding. So the special education funding, and we wouldn't have to allocate that all to special education programming. We could allocate that as part of our general purpose funding, and that could give us some flexibility, creativity. Here's the dilemma. We likely are not going to know about it until October. But maybe that's a good time for us to infuse some mental health services in October when the school year is starting. As I wish we had it now so we could plan for it, because we could all make a better reasoned decision, but that's likely something that's out there that may gain steam between now and October.
One last question. It landed in Table 1, and so it's getting my attention, certainly. The neutral site and homebound instruction is getting to be, that's an expensive, I would assume that that's an expensive add, because on a per student basis, it's a very small ratio, I would imagine. Are there other ways to do that outside of the traditional ways we've been using with retired teachers or whatever the case may be? Are there other ways to support that, which is a growing need? And we see it because we're spending more time at hearings outside of this group. Is there a way to support that differently?
And that is something that the IEP teams talk quite a bit about, because we have to ensure a free and appropriate public education, and so that's something the IEP team would determine. But I know that they are always looking for more innovative ways to educate students. But as Leslie talked about, what we know really matters is that relationship component. And so, there's a lot in addition to neutral site that can go into that in terms of online opportunities. But we know that the foundation is that relationship with the instructor, whether that's neutral site or homebound education. So it's often supplemented with the one-on-one time that they receive, whether that be here or elsewhere.
And certainly we're seeing a growth in our online learning, our blended learning, and it would just be interesting to see if there's an innovative way to use that same blend here.
Thanks, Tim. Barb?
Just to follow up on that particular thing. So, are you talking about the possibility, for example, of an educator talking with a student using virtual technology versus actually going to the home? So that personal connection is happening. It's not just saying, go on your computer and do this and that.
Right. Well, it really depends on the student, but that is definitely an option that we've been exploring. And I know there's an article in the Observer with one of our students who's homebound that, actually has the robot come to school to be her. So we're definitely exploring alternatives. But we, as you can imagine, we've really found that one-on-one connection is really the foundation of the learning experience.
Right.
So we don't want to supplant it with technology. We want to use technology to enhance it.
Right. And then on Table 1, the science and social studies. So if an additional teacher is added, it would be either in science or social studies, and then that would still leave a need in the other?
It's working. Basically, what we have right now is a parallel position in 7th grade. And so that teacher teaches a few sections of social studies and a few sections of science. And so we would add another position like that, depending on who we find. We might have someone do science in both grades, and so the other person would do social studies in both grades. But basically, if we don't add the position, we're looking at like 30s for all the science and social studies sections in one of those grades next year.
Okay, but one additional teacher would help lower class sizes
in both
for
content areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
But my question is related to that. Sorry for jumping in, but it ties in. Is how come that's not the case with math and English?
Because we have teachers who are teaching sections of enriched math and enriched English. And so we currently have more teachers in those content areas, so class sizes are lower in those two content areas.
And then on the STEAM coordinator, that person would not be a direct teacher, but would be something like a coach or a leading educator type position?
I think what we'd envision is someone to really coordinate the curriculum and the experiences in the learning. But since it's in Table 3, I think that's a wish list for us. But we are just seeing our kids just have great enthusiasm around that. And so really to someone to help us really coordinate. We've got things happening K4, but to really have a thoughtful plan as to how they, learn STEAM K through 12.
Right. Is that potentially somebody who would be in the leading educator position?
Potentially, and as Krista was talking about, we will be back in April to talk about the leading educator positions and our evaluation of them and where we see them going next. But in addition, under the STEAM coordinator too, what I would also talk about is our outdoor learning, our gardens, hoop houses, all of that under the umbrella of STEAM and really coordinating student experience in the outdoor classrooms as well.
Okay. And then I just want to ask a little bit about the math interventionist. on table 3, it notes that if we focused on math intervention at 3rd and 4th grade, perhaps this would help reduce needs at RCI, but we still are potentially needing a half-time person at RCI. But I guess my question is more, do we have any data that shows at what point the earlier math intervention is actually helping with diminish the need for intervention at the later grades? And I would assume that would be students who start with us versus students who come in partway through middle school or intermediate school with needs that we haven't been able to address.
That is the goal, right? Is that we have intervention and that the students become proficient and then don't need intervention anymore. I think what we're finding too with a very mobile population is that we often have students coming to us from outside of our district, and so that is often where we're seeing some intervention needs, as well as we do have a small population of students that do stay with us in terms of intervention or move off and come back on. But that is always our goal, is that it's a short-term solution. I don't know, Leslie, if you want to add anything to that.
Well said. Thank you. Okay, that's it.
Going back to Barb's point, is it possible that the STEAM coordinator position could be rolled into the assistant director of instruction job description? And yeah, okay, so there's some flexibility.
Any more?
I just have one other question, sorry. We're considering the $150 state aid today. They're talking about 200. I know some schools are thinking about 100. But does that extra 50, if we got to 200, come with a couple $100,000 more in money? Okay. Thank you.
A question on 5, 6, are we talking just one teacher, and is that at 5th grade or 6th grade? Because if I'm looking at the class size, it looks, at 5th grade we're at 25 students per section, and the same at 6th grade. We've got 13 sections in one and 12 at the other. Where would that one go? Are we talking 5th or 6th or both?
Jason and I talked about that, and we would look to add one teacher, and it would depend on the enrollment because both of the grades are very close, as you could see, so we are just going to monitor. I suspect we will see an increase at 5th grade because that's when RCI starts, but that would be something we would look for board approval, but probably not post until June.
Right, we just do a placeholder in our budget. Okay. One idea I had when we were talking about, I'm thinking out loud now, so Andy, don't jump on me, that when the board has expressed a lot of interest about counseling and social worker needs and school psychologists as being a priority. And I think in April when we have our prioritization, that's going to surface again. And we're not going to know whether or not there's funding for that until potentially October. One of the roll of the dice strategies is to, if we think it's going to happen, is to budget for those positions and reserve fund balance for that with the idea that we're going to get it. I am one of the Andy advocates that I don't want to spend fund balance on ongoing operational costs. So we'd have to be pretty sure that was going to fund, but that would be one way to get on board before school started. I'm just throwing that out there as a thought process. But I mean, it's really risky, and it's one thing that has kept us really in good stead financially to be able to provide the services that we do, is that we haven't spent on a credit card or on our fund balance. But it just depends on what we hear through the budget process. Okay.
I think one point to that, though, is we also know that the earlier we can address mental health issues, it's preventative. And so does it save us funding later and things that we will have to address later? So I think that's a pertinent point as well.
Okay. Did you guys get the information you needed? I think the board needs some funding and costing information for this.
Yes, we are set, and I would encourage board members to keep the questions coming to me or to Gina or to Steve, and we will keep everybody in the loop if you raise a question, because likely if one board member has it, a few others might have the very same question. And we will be back in, I don't have the April date off the top. April
We'll do it
8th?
at the first meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll be back at April 8th with improved estimates and the prioritizations of table 2 and 3.
Yes, and I will put numbers. I just want to say, since we're all here, and I will share that electronically, is I look at historically who we hire, but it always is an estimate because we look to hire the best person. And with our salary schedule, that can be a big range in terms of what a position, what the expense is, as well as what they elect for health insurance. So, we've done, I think with Andy's help, we've done a fairly good job of being accurate in our estimates, but I just want you to know, I know that like 75% of our staff take the family plan. So I sort of average that out over the position. So I just want people to know that it's not always a dollar for dollar match on the position, but as an aggregate, we come out okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Yep. Okay.
And Brian and I will work on kind of what format we use for the prioritization determination. We may do it in a workshop format, but as opposed to something like this, we'll keep you posted. Snow Makeup Day. This is an informational item, and we're going to be presented with some options by the administration for purposes of giving board feedback to the administration and making the decision as to how to proceed. So, Brian, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm going to begin with having Gina run through. We have a PowerPoint, which is part of your packet. I see some of you have it. Gina's going to walk through it quickly, and we can gather feedback from the board. We can also share what our tentative thoughts are, and we're hoping we have an A-team meeting tomorrow morning, so we've got one more pass tomorrow morning, and ideally, if all goes well at tonight's meeting and tomorrow's A-team meeting, we'd like to make the announcement to parents tomorrow. But again, that's our timeline. That is not a state-required timeline. So I will turn it over to Gina to give us a quick walkthrough.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of inclement weather, I just wanted to remind everyone where we started. If you look at the school calendar for this year, and I'm not connected, Andy, so do you mind driving? Okay, thank you. We have missed 6 days this school year due to inclement weather. When we adopted the 18-19 school calendar, we built in 3 inclement weather days. If there had only been the 3, then school would have ended June 12th, which has been a half day historically. So letting you know, our instructional hours that are required by DPI, they vary by level. So 4K, 437 hours, and we have well over that. K6 is 1050 hours, and 712 is 1,137 hours. So usually when I look at our calendar requirements, I focus mainly at the 712 area because that is our highest requirement. So in terms of, we've missed 3 instructional days. So how do we make up the 3 instructional days that we've missed, not only for our contractual requirements, but also to ensure that students receive the instruction for the school year. So in looking at our current school start times, just wanted everybody to have an idea of what those are. Our K4 are pretty close to each other. There's a difference of about 5 minutes. And then we RCI, OMS, and OHS progressively start a little bit later. So just wanted to give you a look at the current landscape. So as a team, we talked about what are the options for making up the 3 days. We have 3 options that we've been talking about. Our first option would be to go to school Friday, June 14th, and have the 14th day be a half day. The reason why we looked at a half day is because at the high school level, we traditionally have exams on the last 3 days. And keep in mind, this would be for K-11. So our seniors would be done that Friday before graduation, no matter what we decide. Yes, I could see I got your attention on that one. Right? Yeah, that's right. So in terms of at the high school, having a half day, the last day is attractive because of makeup exams. So in looking at that, if we went through June 14th and kept that as a half day, K-8, we would look at adding 5 minutes to the start time and ending 5 minutes later, as well as at the high school. And that would be the equivalent of the 3 instructional days. We looked at option 2, which is the middle ground, where we would have last day of school would be Thursday, June 13th as a full day, which would reserve June 14th for makeup exams. If we went that route, then we would add 5 minutes to the day, to the start time and 7 minutes to the end time. And then we also looked at the third option. So in terms of going to June 12th, having that be a full day, June 13th would be a makeup exam day. If we did that, then we would have to add 20 minutes starting April 1st. And so we felt it was best to continue with 5 minutes earlier, and then we would go 15 minutes later. So just to show you what that would look like on the next slide, we have the current schedule on the left, and then the 3 options, what the start times and dismissal times would be at each of our schools. So in talking about as a team, really what are the advantages to each of the options, and we just did a really quick summary on the last slide, that if we ended school June 12th, that would align to our current calendar. There would be less conflicts for families and staff, and we would keep June 13th as our professional development day. If school ended June 14th, we would have more full instructional days, which we feel can be more valuable than adding minutes. It would also help hourly staff in terms of their compensation. And in terms of the professional development day, then that would turn to June 17th, which we would probably make as more of a flexible day. Because we know that staff would have to wrap up. You know, if we went a full half day on Friday, there'd be a lot of grading and wrap up and other things for staff to do. And I suspect many of them would prefer to probably do it Friday night and Saturday than be at school on Monday. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bussler.
We are ready to gather some board feedback, and we can give you our tentative thought process as well. So we'll go in whichever order that you prefer.
Let's get feedback. Barb.
So if school ended on June 14th, what would happen with that PD day?
Okay. We would still have staff be accountable for the hours, but I assume it would take a more flexible approach. So rather than requiring all staff to be here on June 17th, that we would look for each staff person to have a plan as to how they would account for the 8 hours.
So the original plan with June 13th was that there was going to be a structured program, or were teachers going to be developing their own approach for that day?
It varies by building. Traditionally at the 7-12, it's a grading day, and at the other buildings, it depends on what's happening at the building level.
Okay. And then just a comment about the June 12th end date. Wondering if the later end time would affect students who work, or teachers who have to pick up kids or do other things, or bus drivers who may have another job to get to or another obligation. Just a thought.
We know whichever option we choose is going to have an impact on people. And so our goal is to communicate as early as we possibly can. And, hopefully everybody will work together to make whichever option we land on work. And I think the bus drivers have been preparing for this, so I'm less worried about that than I am for other obligations. But, we would certainly be flexible and work with people.
I'd just be curious what we're hearing from the educators. I
had a conversation with Laura and with Nate last Thursday at our leaders meeting, and they said with a smile, this is one of those classics, 49%, 49%, almost no matter what. Or if we look at the three options, it could be 33%, 33%, 33%. The one thing we know as a district, we've had a history of making up days. And parents right now, I believe, or at least the ones that are communicating with me, and I'll tell you, I'm a bit surprised. I haven't received a landslide of parent feedback, and it's mostly been positive. One night I was with Dawn, and where's Dawn? Is she here? She's not. There she is. I was with Dawn and Anna at Prairie View, a book and a dinner, and I was handing out student bookmarkers. I probably visited with 250 to 300 parents. I didn't have time to ask them all a survey question, but the vast majority said, we know we have to make up school. This has been a bizarre winter. Just make the best decision possible. So, very little feedback. I will say, as we've tossed and turned with this, the idea of getting out as quickly as we can, which matches with the calendar, does have one downside, and that's 20 minutes of additional class time from April through the end. I think for our elementary kids, that's a big deal. And if you're looking for some middle ground, that middle ground might be the Thursday day, as it still gets us out before Friday, which allows Jim in the high school to have makeup exams that Friday morning, but that Thursday might be the sweet spot.
I've gotten questions, so can you just address why the minutes are the only options you're looking at instead of looking at days off for school? I think a lot of people aren't clear on why we're not looking at April days instead of just looking at minutes. So if you could just address that.
Certainly. So we did talk about the April 22nd day, and that is reserved as a professional development day, and we did talk about potentially having school on that day. It is our last professional development day in terms of adult learning, and we have a number of things scheduled for that day. Particularly, we have a speaker coming in to talk about equity, and we felt that opportunity and our commitment to professional development in terms of the educator compensation system, that we would look at as sort of holding that day, because at the time we came up with the options, we were hoping we wouldn't have more inclement weather days, but it's not a guarantee. So if we go with one of the three options here and we were to get another day, because we have had snow in April before, then that would be reserved as an instruction day, sort of a plan B.
And then just my other question is practical in terms of parents have the right, if they have a vacation, to take their kid out on June 12th, like any other, correct?
Absolutely. There was a day, and I'm forgetting which one. Again, we have about 4,100 students, but over 200 students were logged into IC as cold weather, which means it's an excused absence, but parents felt the best thing for their son or daughter was not to be in school on that particular day when we were in session. Now, 200 students sounds like a lot, but when you spread it across the district our size, parents always have the right, and we would excuse those absences.
Courtney? Troy?
So two questions. I'm wondering about the bus schedules. Would the bus schedules, like say for pickup, actually change, or do we have enough buffer built into our drop-off times?
They would need to change.
They would. Okay.
Just because the two are so close to each other. They both change by whatever the amounts.
Okay. And then my second question was on the hourly compensated staff members. Like just take option 2, for example, how would they be affected, or would they not?
So, for example, in terms of our food service staff, they are traditionally done around 2 o'clock. So, adding minutes to the day, they would not make up that compensation. If we went longer days, then they would. So, if we're in school the 13th and the 14th, then we would have them employed to serve lunch. One thing, depending on which option we go with, once we have certainty on that, then we would look at how we could address the compensation from an hourly standpoint, because we do budget a certain number of days, so we could look at where would we land budget wise, because our intent is not to shortchange the dedicated hourly staff that we have. But just for example, additionally, we have paraprofessionals who might work part-time, don't work a whole day. Making up those minutes may not necessarily equate to them for losing 3 days of pay.
Practically, how does it work if a child has 10 minutes extra school? Do they have one class that's 10 minutes longer? Does each class get 1 minute longer? Do the bells change? How does that work?
That would be something that the leadership teams at each of the buildings would look at in terms of how do we best maximize the schedule for student learning.
How has it been done in the past? Each hour gets a little longer. Thanks.
Beckon, anything?
That was actually just my only question of what was
Yeah. Well, that and what about seniors, too? Yeah. 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 Hey, self-interest is totally allowed. Yeah. Okay. Are you hearing anything in terms of feedback from the students?
I think, well, seniors of course don't care, but the rest of the school, I think they've always wondered what's the point in adding, a minute to each class. Is that really going to affect our education in any way? But they also understand we need to make up that time somehow. So, seeing the option 1 to option 2, I don't really know if the two minutes is going to make a huge difference, except the fact that one gets out a day and a half earlier.
Yeah. You just have extra days, though, in class, which would be of the educational value of being there extra days.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean. To some students, it seems like a lot more valuable just to go the extra 2 minutes every day and have a full day and a half off. 2 minutes isn't going to affect them too much at the end of the day.
Thanks. I really don't have any feedback for you. There are pros and cons of each one of these, and the reason I thought it was an operational decision for administration was because you know how it plays into the running of the school in terms of which one of these three you pick, and all the factors that go into it. So I don't have a strong preference to them. I do know that we have always talked historically in the situation of making up days for days and not focusing on minutes. So that if that precedent would prevail, that would mean going through the Friday, June 14th, to make up those days. But I understand the middle ground is 2, and the third keeps the integrity of the current calendar. So I don't have a strong view. Anybody have a strong preference on the board or share with them? I didn't hear anything coming from anybody on the board.
Just give you my opinion. I like option 2, just middle of the road. So it's just my opinion.
I've always been of the opinion that the last days of school are a waste as far as educationally goes. People's minds aren't there. I'd be surprised if having extra days would really result in extra education any more than having extra minutes would. That's my thoughts. I'd just as soon see school end on the scheduled day with the extra minutes added.
Going twice? Okay, you got your feedback, and then we'll wait the decision on that.
Board members, thanks for your feedback on this. We will work through it at A-Team tomorrow, and if all goes well, we should have an announcement late in the day.
Thank you. State budget, 1921.
I alluded a little bit to this already about a week ago. I guess it was last week, Thursday or Friday. I attended a CISA 2 session where state legislators and representatives and senators were attended, and it was in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. So it was everyone in our CISA. And as this will come as no surprise, the speakers at the session spoke around party lines. So I will say there was general support for additional funding. Not as much support for Governor Evers' budget because his budget is well over $1 billion for public schools. But I was delighted to hear two Republicans say minimally they can envision a $600 to $800 million increase for public school funding. I almost wanted to ask the question again because I haven't heard that in such a long time. That sort of warmed my heart. That's probably closer to the $200 and likely has some money for special education, which would benefit us and benefit districts across the state. So that I was really pleased with. I'll also say both parties predicted it's going to take a while to work out this budget. So I think to Steve's point, it may be smart for us to make an estimate, recognize that if we're significantly wrong on the estimate, we may have to eat some of that funding out of fund balance for the first year. But I think it's really unlikely we're going to have a state budget by July 1st, and we need to make our plans for class sizes and for our programming so we can hire people for next year. So this year is likely going to be a guesstimate, but I was encouraged. And this Wednesday, I think Steve is joining me at the Day at the Capitol. Other board members, you would be, Barb's coming too? Fantastic. It's an opportunity, again, for us to get another update. I haven't seen the agenda yet, but there's usually speakers from both sides of the aisle. And it gives us an opportunity to visit with legislators and also share our story in terms of what public school funding means to our particular district and to schools across the state. So I am looking forward to that.
Any questions on the budget? All right. Video time.
Okay, now you're ready for something really cool that I forgot to do last month.
This is really
which
cool.
Only makes this month better. And Andy is going to cue up a video that was prepared by Bray Architects. I'll say they typically have their graduate architect students work on this. So it's designed to be a video rendering of the spaces. I'll say there's a few things that aren't 100% accurate. We haven't picked out furniture, so they've put some placeholders in the building. And I can see it on Andy's screen, but I can't see it on the big screen. And this is the exterior. It's actually an interior rendering view.
How about to the floor confidence monitor? But I'll start it. You guys can catch up.
There we go.
We'll just give a simple narration. This is as you're walking into the main entry, and the first area that you will enter is the community area, also known as the cafeteria.
That's the community room right at the front.
Andy, if you want to narrate, go right ahead.
So that's the community room. It'll be available. There's actually a little bit of a kitchenette in that down that hallway over to the left. The serving lines would be to your left, behind us now. That's one of the 3 courtyards you're staring at on the other side of the commons cafeteria.
So in the entry vestibule, is that monitored to let people in?
Yeah, there's an office that's right next to it, similar to all of our other secure entrances, and then security film, those types of things would be on those windows. The glass up above there, because we're facing south at this point, actually has a, you see a little bit of the glare that came through, actually will have a built-in system that will actually dim the glass so that we don't get that glare, and we don't have to have shades or anything like that. You're now looking at the gym, so you're looking west, and you can see the gymnasium through those windows, similar to what we have downstairs here, where the commons into the gym is kind of a very light area. Lots of natural light throughout the entire facility. And obviously the stage to your right-hand side, similar to room corners, just a lot more light than what we have there. And it actually projects out into the area a little bit in a square way. Double-sided so that it can, I'm not exactly sure how that looks, but. So now we're going through the classrooms on the front of the building. You see the little dashes of blue carpet. That's supposed to designate water, which is a natural resource that we have, obviously. And that's supposed to carry into the different pods that we have.
So the offices are there on the right?
Yep, the offices were to our right, absolutely. So this is one of the pods. And Leslie, if you want to jump in here, you can too. Is this the kindergarten area? No.
No, they're just going to show you.
Go ahead and turn that microphone on.
Sorry, I get so excited I can't help it.
They're
just going to show you the pod areas. This is, of course, I think it's first and second that are down here. You can see that green underneath the carpet area. You'll see that it's mimicking grass, and you'll see it around the building as places for kids to sit down and read. Now you're going into the area where you have the classrooms, and this group of classrooms together at this point is being referred to as a grove. And one side and all of the classroom areas will always be opened to one of the courtyards. Remember, one of them is a large outdoor classroom. The middle one is the kindergarten playground. And then the next one is garden beds. And of course, the view out all the back, the collaboration areas in the classroom will be a woodsy look. So kids will see trees everywhere they're looking. Nope, this is a collaboration area for a group of classrooms. But there were 2 classrooms on one side and there's 2 on the other.
And then on the back side of that is another courtyard. Again, flooding the area with natural light from both sides.
And you'll notice that groups of 2 classrooms will have a door in between so that teachers will be able to teach in a collaborative way and have kids passing through. Each area has a theme: wind, light, thermal. We have to make sure we're using all the right words, so we're really working on this.
Is that a natural light thing as much as an energy?
It's critical to the natural light component. And Andy, you can talk about the energy piece if you'd like. You can see her up here in the wind area. See all that? None of those words have been decided upon. These are all just placeholders. But the fun part about coming upstairs is you're going to get into the Discovery Center in just a minute. And so you have some classrooms, and then they'll turn around a little bit and you'll be able to see what the Discovery Center, formerly known as the library, looks like. You have 2 areas for full classes, depending on whether the teacher could be teaching there or the LMC director, Discovery Center director would be teaching there. The 2 smaller glass collaboration areas for small groups. And then at the end, you can see the glass on the far side. That is an architectural jut out, and they're referring to it as the nest because it's floor to ceiling glass and all the kids see are treetops, and it's a place for them to read, either in small groups, but it's large enough for a full class.
And those big windows face north.
Correct.
That's about enough to make me want to go back to grade school.
Isn't that terrific?
It is quite a picturesque view for an elementary school, and you'll notice all the natural light. There's one thing that I recall over the years of being involved in building new schools. We've never had too much natural light, and we have some unique opportunities with the orientation of the site and with the site being elevated a bit, and the opportunity in the back when we're looking to the property to our north. It is, once the trees leaf out and once the trees turn color, it will be one of the greatest pictures in the Oregon School District. So we are excited. Again, there's some nuances that the graduate students put in there that might look a little bit different when we finish. And the other thing that I can include in the weekly letter is sort of the floor plan layout of the building. Remember, it's a 2-story building, but the 2 stories of the building, it's only 2-story on the back side. On the front side, as you're walking up to the school, it is a 1-story building. But it's built with all of the same features that we have in terms of school safety and security, where the only entry to the school is through the main entrance, then being buzzed into the library, just like the initial design that we did 20 years ago at RCI, which we have now, in essence, replicated at every school. So it's exciting to get underway. Andy told me earlier today, and I didn't forget, I think the first set of bids are due this Wednesday, and that bid package is on excavation work and underground and utility work. So we are ahead of the schedule with that, should get some very competitive bids. And then the next bid package, which is the main one, will go out, I think it's the end of May-ish. I think the end of May. So we will have our bid pricing early, and obviously we will be reporting back to the board where we are bid pricing wise as we continue to monitor and implement the project.
Great. Thanks. That was terrific to see. Superintendent's report.
Oh, it's going to be short tonight. I will say, since we were one of the lead stories last week on the middle school and RCI traffic study, Andy and I had an opportunity to visit with the Village of Oregon this past Friday, and we mutually agreed to a traffic study that both the village and the school district are going to contribute to. Our contribution will be $12,000 or up to $12,000. Their contribution will be up to $12,000. And for some of you that are not historians, the last time we did a traffic study, we worked in cooperation with the village. At that time, their traffic engineer was MSA, and or was our study MSA Mid-States. Thank you. And that's who had been working in the village for a number of years, and they felt comfortable, so we worked out an agreement with them. They made the changes to the middle school. We didn't really make any changes to RCI, So this time we're using Strand and Associates, and the goal is they're going to come out and do some traffic counts early here, and now they have traffic modeling computers and data to add load and to identify those high time periods, because remember, our schools are overcrowded. So as we're overcrowded at RCI, we have more parents dropping off. We hope to have a couple of options and ideas back for possibly implementation this fall. Again, some of those can be low cost, some of those can be higher cost. Obviously, if it's a big dollar amount cost and it's super expensive, it may take us a while to phase into it. If it's a signage or a lower cost item, we'll have that too. But the benefit is we're working collaboratively with the village, and we're getting a traffic engineer's eyes on what the challenges are and what the best solutions are. So Andy, I'm recalling from Friday, we might have their report back sometime in May if all goes well, and we'll bring it back to the board and let you know where things are at. So that's my top superintendent report item, and I already shared the WASB Day at the Capitol, and I just happen to know it's one administrator's birthday today, and administrators love to go to board meetings on their birthday. And he's smiling in the back row. It's Mr. John Tanner. So we wish him a very, very happy birthday today. That completes my report.
Any questions for Brian? All right. Seeing none, we're going to closing future agenda, our April 8th meeting. We'll do our staffing plan on that.
Yes.
As our primary item. It'll also be, Dan, it'll be your last meeting. And so we're, as typical of our last meeting for board members, we're going to have a reception starting at 6. Okay? Dan's got a cake choice already made. I believe it's chocolate on chocolate, right? So anyway, mark that down that we'll start at 6 o'clock and celebrate Dan's end of 6 years, right? 6? Yeah. To do that. Anybody else have any items on the agenda? Let Brian or me know. Checkout. Barb? Nothing. Tim? Nothing. Krista? Courtney? No. Joy? Dan? No. I have one thing, and that is to congratulate Tim, because he is the father of the Collegiate All-American. His daughter, Maddie, placed 8th on the St. Norbert College 4x400 team and had All-American status. So congratulations to you. I saw pictures from Boston. It's an amazing feat. So congratulations to you and Susie and also to Maddie.
And to us for a wonderful alum.
Yes,
Yeah.
I might add that we had 3 Oregon former students there. Alex Duff was there, placed 5th in the hurdles. The hurdles. I can't remember which event it was, but he is an incredible athlete. So he too is NCAA All-American, and Johnny Auer participated in the long jump as a freshman. It was an awesome experience for him. His all their parents were there, so it was great to see Oregon people all the way in Boston competing against people from Oregon to New Hampshire. Very good.
Great. We will move now. We'll take a 5-minute recess, and the board will adjourn over to our side conference room for an executive session. We will not be returning to open session. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you after spring break.